I'd like to say thank you and Donnie for bringing this fantastic.
Yes.
Just exquisite quality. Somebody who's committed to providing a wonderful experience, the eating part of this. We're grateful for that. Especially as we talk about our family homelessness, and we think about the importance of food and the value of food, and what the quality of food can mean for a person, a family. This is just a wonderful effort to that. Do we have any guests that are here with us today that we don't know? Sir, would you introduce yourself?
My name is Paul Craven, and my wife's Heather Craven, and Heather is working for this, so she couldn't come, she wouldn't want to come. She said, you gotta go. Personally.
Thank you.
We currently attend up at Fauntleroy, but we also support Crossroads downtown. That's all. We're good friends with Rick Reynolds. So we support his mission.
Any other guests that aren't Alki UCC folks would like to welcome you, sir?
Okay, Marion, I identify as a youth and student of social justice. Basically, trying to put a face on the homeless issue. From my own understanding. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
I'm Marianne DeVry, and I call Hope Lutheran my home church, but then I've also been working with so many people here with West Seattle churches trying to address some of these problems, one of the main ones being homelessness.
Welcome.
I'm Carrie, and I'm happy to be here. I found out about the project that Alki Church here is doing with homelessness, and I just felt I wanted to learn more about ways that I can be involved in the community, and especially I'm interested in the homelessness part. So thank you for what you're doing.
Carrie was also part of our team that went down last Monday for homeless advocacy day in Olympia. She was part of our team for that as well. It's great to have her along. So why don't we begin and just talk about who we are today. So thank you very much for coming. Welcome. Alki UCC United Church of Christ welcomes you today. Wherever you are in life's journey, we got a place for you here. We are the Homeward Bound, a Home for Every Family program. We are very excited to have today two wonderful guests on our panel. We're going to have Timothy Harris and Alison Eisinger. They're going to be talking about the very important work they've been doing for many years in our community, and hopefully invoking and provoking a sense of advocacy in each of us. We talked about how we can be smarter advocates and actually more effective advocates as well for family homelessness. Homeward Bound, a Home for Every Family, is part of a larger program, Faith and Family Homelessness, put together by the folks at Seattle University School of Theology, financed through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We are a part of 14 other congregations, synagogues, mosques that are working to address a pretty simple, single goal, which is the ending of family homelessness. Simply stated, but not so simply. Ending family homelessness, and that's what the purpose of Homeward Bound, a Home for Every Family is about. And we're excited to have you all here today. And our last panel, we had a group of professionals who are participating in the world of direct immediate homeless services. We talked about what kinds of things they're doing. We had folks from 211 Family Housing Connection. We had folks from Solid Ground, Mary's Place, Sacred Heart Shelter, also from King County Drug Court. And we got a chance to hear from them what are some of the direct services that are necessary to help homeless families. We're hoping today to hear from experts in the field of advocacy and talking about some of the larger structural issues and what kind of advocacy efforts will be necessary to help homeless families as well. So I'm just going to have Alison and Tim come on up and have a seat, and I'll allow them to tell us something about who they are, where they're from, and what they do. And then just kind of give you a snapshot of what we're going to do today. After the two of them get a chance to tell us about who they are and what they're doing, we're going to watch a short video. What's the name of this video, guys? Remember what this video is? It's called Out of Options, Family Moves into a Truck. About 10 minutes long, maybe 9 minutes long. We'll get a chance to watch the video together. Then we're going to ask Alison and Tim to give their first impressions on it. What does this tell you about homelessness, family homelessness in our community? And then we're going to expand the conversation from there to larger issues of what are some of these structural issues that are creating that crisis, or exacerbating that problem, whether it's political, economic, cultural, and social, and what kind of advocacy efforts can actually mediate that kind of crisis. And we'll talk about also as an organization, as a congregation, how we can get involved. So hopefully by the end of the day, we get inspired and we have some really good tools, and we feel like there's something that needs to be done, and we know how to do it. So I'd like to first start with giving our panelists a chance to introduce themselves. I'll start here at my left. Timothy Harris from Real Change. Please tell us something about yourself, your agency, your mission, and your role there, please.
Okay. Well, my name's Tim Harris. I'm the founding director of Real Change. The first time I did anything around homelessness was in 1984 when me and about a dozen other folks from the Radical Student Union at UMass Amherst got into a van and drove to Washington, D.C. and got arrested in support of a 41-day hunger fast by Mitch Snyder, the community of creative nonviolence in D.C. And it wasn't until a few years later that I started actually working and organizing homeless folks, but that's where it began. Real Change provides opportunity and a voice to low-income and homeless people while taking action to I'm blanking on my damn mission statement. This is
There you go.
something about taking action around inequality. Blah, blah, blah. On a typical month, we have about 330 vendors who are out selling the paper. We see those vendors as being engaged and part of a network of a real sort of web of relationships around the city and beyond the city. And we think that those relationships is where effective advocacy begins.
And Alison.
My name is Alison Eisinger, and I'm the director of the Seattle King County Coalition on Homelessness. Long name, we go by our initials, SKITCH, which really don't mean anything if you're not in the mix, so you can also think of us as the Coalition on Homelessness. The coalition itself is the oldest independent homeless advocacy group in the United States. It was founded in 1979. And that is not coincidentally right about the time that the modern crisis of homelessness in the United States became visible. And the coalition's roots are really in the people providing the services, local government folks, members of faith communities, and people who were experiencing homelessness. And for 27 years, there were no paid staff. The coalition did an unbelievable amount of organizing and advocacy and creation of, which Dave Bloom was part of, shelter and housing and awareness around the crisis of homelessness in first Seattle and then more broadly King County. One of the things that the coalition is best known for is the one-night count of people who are homeless. And as many of you know, we just completed our January one-night count of people without shelter. The coalition actually used to count everyone, people outside in shelter, and when transitional housing was invented, people in transitional housing. So I'm going to talk a little bit later on about that one-night count. But when I was hired, I was the first paid staff person for the coalition. And my roots go back to about the same time as Tim's. I think I got on a bus to go to DC, not to get arrested, but to be part of a big Housing Now demonstration in 1986. And I was in college at the time and involved in all sorts of activities, which really brought home the fact that when you have privilege, you have to use it. And so I dropped out of college, which is one way to do it. And I wound up in a job as an advocate, a children's advocate for homeless families who were living in apartment hotels in New York City in the late 1980s at about the height of the crack epidemic and at the point at which family homelessness started to just grow exponentially. And it's not an exaggeration to say that changed my life. I wound up doing a variety of other things between then and getting my current position. But I think what's fun about the opportunity to come and talk with you all and hear about what you're doing and where you're at is the fact is that we have an opportunity, I think, at a point at which we've accepted to some extent a 30-year history of homelessness, to reinvigorate a sense of crisis around this issue and to blend doing something to assist families and individuals who are homeless with taking action to change the political and economic circumstances that generate homelessness.
What we'd like to do now is to engage the video behind us, and Shannon's going to come up, and perhaps the two of you might want to have a seat on the couch. Heavy chairs, and put them all together. And again, we're kind of looking for the notions of first impression. What does it say about homelessness in our community, and we'll go outwards from there.
Hi, I have a question. Do you allow people to sleep in their vehicles in your parking lot overnight? My son and I are homeless. He is 17 years old. I have dialed 211, got numbers from them. I've called everywhere. There is no place that will take us. Where can we park my truck and sleep? Okay.
It's been tough. We've been trying for the longest time to get things to work out, and it just seems like the harder we try, the more that it doesn't work, the more that it fails or backfires, and it seems like there's nothing out there. It's just like an empty road that we're going down, and it's never gonna stop.
Believe me, I could give you the list of phone calls that I have called in the last 2.5 weeks, and they will tell you exactly what they've told me. We can't help you. I am considered scum of the earth because I am homeless, even though I work.
They probably wonder why we're here, because my mom has a job, and it's the two of us. None of us have any type of addiction, so just because you don't have an addiction doesn't mean that you can't become homeless. I mean, the way the economy's been and everything, anybody can end up homeless. They could lose their job and end up homeless tomorrow for all they know.
Because I get a paycheck on Monday. I get paid on Monday, but between now and then, I have $6 to my name.
So basically, with the last month, to do a quick overview of the last month of our lives, we were in a house, we were renting a room there, but because of all the drugs and alcohol and partying and everything, because my mom worked 6 days a week, we left there. We stayed in the truck for 3.5 weeks, and towards the end of that 3 weeks, things started actually moving forward. The YWCA had put us up in a hotel for 5 days. Towards the end of those 5 days, they got us here in the shelter out here in Kent. And hopefully on from here, we can get into transitional housing and to a more permanent living situation. Right now, I feel awesome to have our own place, not have to worry about all the things that we'd have to worry about when we're in a truck, whether it's finding a place to sleep, finding some way to eat. Now we have more of a variety of what we can eat. We don't have to just basically stick to fast food. We could eat almost anything we want now. The first night here, it was really awkward. I was creeped out. It seemed like I wasn't going to be able to sleep because it was quiet and it's a bigger place. It's not the truck. I got used to that small confined space, and it was like, oh, we don't have to worry about it anymore. It's made things a lot easier. It's made me a lot happier.
Starting with initial impressions. Wait, after watching that.
Well, I'm tempted to say that I'd be interested to hear from all of you. We've actually seen it before, and I don't have a fresh response. I am happy to share my response, but I think it would be interesting to hear from the folks who are here, Shannon. That's okay? Yeah.
Sure. Who would like to dive in?
You know, they're the fortunate ones, because they get a vehicle. There are so many people without vehicles, or whose vehicles, they might have been in a vehicle, but then the vehicle either gets impounded, because they left it too long when they went away, you know, during the day, or because it's broken down, or whatever. There's just so many reasons that they lose. I'm not belittling what they go through, but that's one degree of the many forms of homelessness.
I was struck by we're just starting to think, yes, maybe they can bring it down a notch and settle, and then you're reminded that here's another fix that's only for 1 year. And so it's another case of, yeah, we're giving them lunch, but what do they do with it? What do they do next week?
That someone who works 6 days a week cannot afford housing. That the lack of affordable housing, and even what we call affordable housing, is truly not affordable housing for the incomes that are reached. That even out in Kent or Auburn or further, maybe out in rural areas, we're not talking downtown Seattle with crazy rents, but she works 6 days a week and she can't afford housing.
And those are the types of jobs that our economy is producing right now.
Yeah.
Right.
Jobs that won't support somebody actually living in a room.
Service jobs, yeah. Low wage.
I wondered about the young boy and his education. What future would he have in a job like that? What skills?
And how being homeless interrupts
And
your
interrupts
schooling,
that.
even if you're physically there every day.
I thought the son seemed remarkably nurturing and caring and unangry about the situation, and I just wonder how that kind of all came down. I mean, you know, must be, I mean, in the other films, in the other movies that we've watched, you know, there's been a lot of drama around the kids being, you know, having a lot, suffering a lot, or expressing a lot about the situation.
He was 17 in this, is that correct?
Yeah.
remarkable amount of responsibility for a 17-year-old. Developmentally, very inappropriate.
By law, at age 17, he's not allowed to work, is that right, or can he work? Yeah, okay.
One of the things that she did mention in there was how she had called 211 and they gave her a list of numbers. Since that time, as we had Julie here from Family Housing Connection on our last panel, 211 now takes a different format. We call Family Housing Connection. We set up a meeting with a housing assessment case manager and they put you on the wait lists. Unlike what they had to go through, which was you make a phone call and they give you 15 phone numbers and you begin calling and calling and calling and calling. So we're hoping that perhaps with Family Housing Connection 211, with this new kind of coordinated care entry process, that maybe that's been reduced. Some of the stress and anxiety around that, just the overwhelmingness of it all has been reduced.
Well, how long is the wait list, though?
Yes.
It's 2 to 3 weeks before you get an appointment when you
That's
call 211. It takes 2 to 3 weeks to get an appointment for that assessment.
Well, and that's just to get the assessment.
That's just
There-
the assessment.
Yeah, there are about 2,000 families currently on the waiting list. So I think it is an important point in terms of the way in which this system that we have created to respond to homelessness is still constrained by the capacity of what we have available to offer people. And I mean, that's, I think, what really strikes me. You're absolutely right. This film was made a couple of years ago when the Seattle Times did quite an extensive series around family homelessness called Invisible Families, and you can still get that as a reprint, I think, from the newspaper, and it's a great resource. But there's some attempt to transform the system through which people get access to the limited housing that we have available for families. And there's a process in place to do the same for youth and young adults. And the challenge is that while there's some advantage to streamlining that, and it is really an extraordinary strain on people who may or may not have access to a phone or minutes to call. Most places also didn't have waiting lists because they didn't have a way to manage a waiting list. So, you know, creating a centralized system has some advantages, but it would increase the amount of housing that we had available to offer to people. So that is really where the challenge still lies. And to think in terms of, you know, this family was placed in a motel for 5 days. You know, one of our longtime members who works in childcare for homeless children gave testimony at a city council meeting a few years ago that was, I thought, very moving, because her point was 15 years ago, we never, as advocates, would have been proposing that public funding go towards a motel voucher system. I mean, a motel is such a temporary, such a short-term response, but because of the mismatch between what people need and the dire circumstances that they're in and what we have available to offer that's longer term, we were advocating for, at that point, the city of Seattle to put $400,000 into just paying for motels so that families could get out of trucks or get out of a family violence situation. And knowing that that's short term, but knowing that that would then essentially buy some time for the families and the social workers to try to figure out something longer term.
There's an annual State of King County report that comes out. The 2012 report said that for folks earning under $20,000 a year, basically people in the service industry that are earning under $20,000 a year, that to have enough affordable housing that would be affordable to them, we would need another 45,500 units in the county of low-income housing. And over the last 8 years of the 10-year plan to end homelessness, we've been able to produce about 5,500 units of affordable housing. There's a pretty radical mismatch there.
Well, although I would say, I think the difference is the 10-year plan's goal was to create housing for people who are homeless. And what you're talking about is housing that is affordable for people who are earning very low wages. And that's the thing, is that we don't want to confuse those two things. I mean, there's another way to manage this, which is to provide subsidies and to just accept that our the housing stock that's available isn't affordable to people who are making $10, $11 an hour, which of course is above minimum wage. And to say, well, that therefore we will then plan as a matter of public policy to subsidize that.
So there's the issue of providing housing for homeless people. And then we have to identify what does it mean to be homeless. And we have to parse out a variety of definitions for that qualification. There's this issue also of having just affordable housing for the population of the county. And we're talking about, are those two different things? They necessarily have to be different things. I mean, if we don't have affordable housing for people in the county, they're going to eventually be homeless.
Well, I mean, why are they in trouble when their thing runs out a year from now? Because there is an absence of affordable housing for people who earn the kind of money that she makes. So it really kind of comes down to the same thing.
I mean, I'd say they're not the same thing because of the ways in which we fund housing, but clearly they're closely related, and that's why we have Affordable Housing and Homelessness Advocacy Day. There's no value in pretending that there's not a relationship there, but I don't think it's, part of the reason, to be honest with you, that I think that there's a very powerful interest in engaging congregations like this one in addressing family homelessness, is there is a broader appeal and a broader ability to understand homelessness as it affects very young children and parents and people who are potentially more sympathetic than older, childless, disabled adults. And that's not to say that it's wrong to focus on family homelessness, but part of what we face when we do advocacy around homelessness is that, some of the populations of people who are homeless, who need help, are not portrayed as sympathetically. And I think that that's part of why actually the accomplishments of creating, roughly 5,000 units of housing for homeless people really should be celebrated, because as a community we actually focused on creating housing for people who were chronically homeless, single, childless adults. And that is actually pretty profound. The thing is that we also as a community said we want a 10-year plan to end homelessness, not a 10-year plan to end chronic homelessness, a 10-year plan to end homelessness. And so we really need to see the whole issue and not to sort of segment.
Another thing that struck me about the film was the lack of community. I didn't, where's their family, where's their church? It seemed like they were all by themselves with all these people going around them, and there was no community there. So how isolated they felt. Yeah. And that to me is part of the systemic problem, is that, they're isolated. There's nobody else they can call. I don't know what the story was. I don't know where they came from. Where's the rest of the community? Yeah.
Most of them have, excuse me, a lot of people burn those ties because they've probably already couch surfed, or done that, and you burn out the relationship, and it burns out the support network. It doesn't always happen, but there's also a lot of people who don't have anyone around here. And so, do they go back home to maybe their mom and dad by that time, or in a little condo in Florida? I mean, who knows where, but I mean, it's not really even feasible, or if they did, they would be that much more shamed. So many of them say, I cannot ask for one more time without, they won't help me.
Any other thoughts about the film while we're still
If people transition out of homelessness, out of their places that you've given, do they give them any referral, or did you say your year is up, get out?
Well, this rapid rehousing that this was highlighted for this family, it's not one agency, it's actually, it's a model. And the idea is actually, you know, a pretty commonsensical one. Namely, we had created a system whereby there's sort of a general process. First, you're homeless, you go into a shelter, and then after you've been in a shelter for a while, then when space opens up, then you go into what's called transitional housing, which is still considered homeless because it's term limited, and it can be anything from 3 months to the most is really 2 years. And the idea behind rapid rehousing is we shouldn't set up a system that makes people have to go through those different stages. We should just say, you're homeless, let's rapidly rehouse you, and not create this sort of steps. So that I can totally get behind, and I think there's some real value to saying we're not going to, you know, expect that people sort of prove their worthiness and go through a system or demonstrate steps along the way. And, you know, some people can do well with a minimum of supportive services, and really their issue is fundamentally how to cover first, last deposit and keep food on the table and the lights on. And then there are people for whom there are other issues, and so we're trying to, I think, overall move towards a system where we're not differentiating. We're saying, you know, we're going to help you get housed because it's so traumatizing, it's so destabilizing, it's so counter to sense of stability to put people sort of through this system. However, these are short-term supports. And so that's where you do get to the question of, you know, I don't know the details of this family story. I don't know if the issue is that, you know, the accumulation of, let's say, $1,200 to $1,500 for first month, last month, and deposit is the financial barrier.
It's probably more than 1,500.
Well, and in many cases it's more than that, right? But if you have a subsidy, even. But indeed, you know, if someone is earning, let's say, minimum wage, or working in a job that isn't full-time, or that's seasonal, or someone becomes disabled, you know, all of a sudden they're in a situation where once the subsidy goes away, then they're in trouble again. And that's, I think, you're asking the right question. You know, for some households, 1 year's worth might be enough if someone is in school and is able to secure a job that pays a higher hourly wage, and people have health care, you know, that could be enough. And I think we need to offer that for the families for whom that's enough. But we also can't kid ourselves that that's going to be enough for everybody.
Yeah, I may be just reacting here, but I see a lot of reactive response. I don't see a lot of preventive. Is that missing, or am I just reacting?
Probably in this survey, you didn't see a lot of what were they doing to prevent that cycle of homelessness from starting in the first place.
Right, which I think it could be addressed by providing affordable housing.
And safe, because they were in a place, but they said the partying and the drug activity there drove them out, that the mom couldn't sleep, and so you not only need safe low-income housing, but that is, you know, how do you find safe and quiet and appropriate for a family?
Is there a current figure of what's considered affordable in Seattle, city of Seattle?
And how it charts as
Affordable housing?
You know, I don't even know it off the top of my head anymore, which is embarrassing. Well, there's Seattle, there's King County, and then there's affordability based on the whole state by region. And there's a report called the National Low Income Housing Coalition does a report every year, and we have a state version of it. And if you go to the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance website, which is WLIHA.org, and I can send that exact words. There is, there's actually very good data kind of by region. So for us, it's basically Bellingham, Seattle, kind of grouped together.
I just really want to point out that the average, according to the city of Seattle at this moment, the average cost for one bedroom apartment is $1,000 a month. That's $12,000 a year. At 30% to 35% of your income, your annual income has to be $36,000 to $40,000 a year. That's a long way from, not only from
Exactly
minimum
right.
wage, but from any kind of entry job, anything short of being a professional, really, in some area. So we have a huge gap.
Yeah, I remember a figure about the housing wage in King County. What you need to earn to be able to get into, you know, typically priced housing is about $15 an hour.
Oh, no, I think
It's 18 to 20.
Is it?
Yeah.
It's 18 to $20.
Yeah. But let's just, again, keep in mind, that's market rate housing. And part of why we work so hard to do things like pass the Seattle housing levy at a higher amount that heavily subsidizes housing for people earning 30% of the area median income and below is because there are a lot of people for whom market rate, it's never going to be the solution.
So what's that?
You know, that's the problem, that's the capitalist conundrum.
Yes.
So you have to sort of, you know, given that, what are we going to do? Because you can't, you know, I personally don't think that like the answer to homelessness is a socialist revolution, but there are people who think that. But, you know, if you're going to say, I mean, you know, it may be, but good luck.
How's it working out for you?
I gotta speak to this. Good luck, how's that working out for you is exactly why we're in the situation we're in.
Well, I make that point for two reasons. One is addressing how people end up homeless in the first place. So this is, if your job, if your wages have been cut, if you lose your job, that is the market rate. And what they're saying is how long it takes, then there's another gap between the time you lose your weight and get into any kind of help. And secondly, our politicians love to throw this word around every day. Affordable housing, affordable housing. I encourage people to start specifically saying, what is affordable housing? Put a number on that. Don't just give me that affordable housing jazz. What are you talking about? Because in the city of Seattle, you need at least $1,000 a month. So let's start talking about that. And that's our conversation with our representatives. And that's a one bedroom, not a two bedroom, not a three bedroom, not a four.
Andy asked a very good question about moving, what are politicians doing, how do we define the issues, and how do we name the problem, and we talked about some larger structural economic models as a response to it. Timothy, you had a pretty strong response. Would you mind fleshing that out a little bit further for us?
Sure. And there is a very old fable that was probably trite 20 years ago, but I've been coming back to it over and over again because it just, lately, it just seems so apropos. And that is the babies in the river. Who's familiar with the babies in the river? Fewer of you than I would have thought. So, you know, there's the village, and the baby is floating down the river in a basket, and they fish the baby out of the river, and problem solved, they find a family for the baby to stay with, and then the next day there's a couple of more baskets, and they figure it out, and then the baskets just keep coming down the river with screaming babies with increasing regularity, so they start getting really, really efficient about it. You know, they have basket recycling centers, you know, baby placement agencies. They've got, you know, a very complicated system of gates and such across the river. You know, and they get very, very skilled at dealing with the babies down the river and create this, you know, sort of vast technocratic bureaucracy around it. but they're not going upstream to figure out why the babies are coming down the river. And, as it seems like the fewer resources proportionate to the problem that we have, that the more we get into solutions that are clever and smart and efficient, as I sort of had this reaction earlier when you said something about being smarter and more efficient about our advocacy. We've been smarter and more efficient for a long time. What we need is more resources. And I think the way we get more resources is by being really, really clear that what's going on is unacceptable and tapping in to the moral outrage that people have around homelessness. And I think that there is something problematic about solutions that are, really about efficiency and being smarter, but don't increase the resources, and that a lot of times these things can lull us into a sense that, we're doing this, we're getting smarter and better at it all the time. We've got these programs that are doing great work. Rapid rehousing, what a great idea, but it's kind of a no-brainer. Somebody becomes homeless, you get them into housing as fast as you can. But nonetheless, inequality keeps broadening, I think a couple of weeks ago, the day after the one-night count, and there was the headline on the cover of the Seattle Times that said that we had 2,736 people counted outside, and that the city had reassessed the role of shelter. And the headline right next to that was Howard Schultz's pay was increased by 80%, and he's making $29.6 million a year now. And
not paying any income tax.
And not paying any income tax. And I thought that just kind of set it up.
Right there. Yep.
I've come to the conclusion that part of what we really need to be focused on doing is supporting people who are homeless, whose needs aren't being met, and making that visible, and nurturing grassroots activism by homeless folks themselves, and supporting more militant activism around homelessness, because the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and sometimes I think we don't do ourselves any favors by conveying that we've got this thing under control when we clearly don't.
Now, I was very intrigued when both of you indicated that your involvement with homelessness went back to the late 1970s, and even more interested when I heard you say that you were kind of started out in the New York area. In 1980, I was working in corporate finance for the AT&T Corporation in Basking Ridge, New Jersey. And it was about that time that people in finance started to scratch their chins and say, well, dang, we're manufacturing all of our stuff in places like Columbus, Ohio, and east of, or west of Chicago, Illinois. It would be really very much more profitable if we started to take advantage of our revolution, the telecom revolution, and started doing more of this stuff in places like India, the Far East, and the Philippines. Now, that established itself, not with its base necessarily in AT&T, but a lot of companies were thinking exactly the same sorts of things. And they said, gee, so here's what we do. We ship our jobs overseas. We invest in the distribution channels to get the product back here. We take factory workers out at $20 to $25 an hour, and we replace them at 25 cents a day in the Far East. We ship the stuff across the oceans and across the land, and lo and behold, we make more money. And Guess what? That's exactly what has happened for the last 25 years. The Howard Schultzes of the world, he wasn't there, he wasn't responsible for that in particular, but that's exactly what's happened. The companies have become more profitable, the executives and their financiers are making out like bandits, the middle class has basically stagnated for at least 35 years, and the people who were, who thought that they were all good because they had a high school education, a job in the factory, have basically been cast to the wolves. Now, I'll ask a question. That was a long statement, and I apologize for it. But here in King County, there are a lot of highly profitable businesses. There are a lot of knowledge workers. People are doing very well. And President Obama in the State of the Union address said, well, why don't we raise the minimum wage from $7.25 to $9 an hour? We're already at $9.90. And everybody here is agreeing that we need to be closer to 20 bucks. So my question is, if you go to a Walmart and say, how much of your cost structure in this store is made up of paying your workers, and what would it cost in terms of your products if instead of paying $9.90 an hour, we paid $19 an hour? Has anybody done that math? Because I, for one, would be willing to pay another 25 cents for a T-shirt from South, East Asia, in exchange for knowing that the guy who was selling me that wasn't living out of the back of his pickup truck.
But he'd still be making the T-shirt in Southeast Asia.
I can't correct that. But
I looked this up the other day. I have a son who's got a degree in economics. He got his degree the year that Bob fell out of the market.
Oh.
Right. And so now he's working on his master's, and he's working for Volunteers of America for $10 an hour, actually working with advocating youth homeless people. And he and his girlfriend both make about $10 an hour, and they can afford a $650 a month apartment. So they're making it. I'm not having to subsidize them anymore, so the personal housing subsidy is no longer needed. But it's treacherous. But anyway, so we looked up what is the average, because the way I look at this is the average per hourly wage globally is what, and I think I looked it up, and it's $1,450 a month is the average wage in the world.
In the world.
In the world, and so then you look at this chart. You can look it up. If you look up global average wage, there's a chart. I forget. I think it's the BBC did it. And basically it's got a little slider. We're up here on the right side, and it goes down where you're like Ukraine and these guys here, and it's like half the countries in the world, or maybe a third of the countries in the world are on the right-hand side of that, and 2/3 of the countries in the world are on the left-hand side of that. And so if $1,450 a month, then I don't know what that works out to in terms of hourly wage, maybe it's $6 or something. If that is what the world is driving the global economy to, your point is well taken. Okay, if we all get together and say, yep, we're going to pay for U.S. manufactured stuff, and it's going to cost 30% more because it's made in America, that's how we would respond to that, right? But we'd all have to get on the bandwagon and say, we're not going to be buying it.
I wasn't saying that at all. I appreciate it. It's a thought that's occurred to me. But what I was saying is, what if the minimum wage in King County, or let's say Western Washington, on a more supportable basis, was $18 an hour? So the guy in Walmart, instead of making $9.90 an hour, was making $18 an hour. How much would that increase the cost of the goods that we buy?
Question. Before we go any further on this, though, maybe have you guys got a thought about the kind of advocacy efforts that would be addressing living wage and how that connects to housing? Is that kind of what I'm looking at
One
now?
of the reasons that we're in the situation that we're in is that the labor movement is as weak now as it's ever been, and that's a big part of the problem. And that needs to be turned around, I mean, I think that there is a space in our activism that is somewhere between, technocratic homeless advocacy focused narrowly on poverty solutions and socialist revolution. And, you know, within that is, you know, understanding that if we're interested in ending homelessness, that means supporting the labor movement and supporting workers when we have opportunities to do that. I think the really, you know, sinister thing about homelessness and what's underneath it that doesn't get talked about enough is that, you know, homelessness in our society is about surplus people. And it's about the dynamics that you've talked about. I mean, there's been a global revolution that started with the invention of the internet and the freight container that made it possible to ship jobs anywhere in the world. And since then, and you know, along with that has become increasing automation of labor. A lot of work that people used to have just simply doesn't exist anymore because it's been automated, you know? I mean, a great example of that, I went to Home Depot not very long ago to have my little propane container refilled. And they've got this system there where you just swipe your credit card and a little gate pops open, you take out your propane container. You know, it's like, nobody does that anymore, it's completely automated. We'll multiply that by 1,000, there's a million things like that. And as people have become surplus to the economy, we dehumanize them. We dehumanize them, we turn them into less than human beings in a variety of ways. Homelessness is one way, the prison system is another, there's more. And that's what's really going on, and we have to get at that dehumanization. And I think, you know, a big part of why that goes on is that the labor movement is on the ropes and you don't have the counterforce that you really need.
Well, I think that's really true, and I am really a pragmatist at heart. And I think that there's an opportunity for real, maybe because we happen to have this funny system in Washington State where we have a legislative session that's, you know, this is our long legislative session, and it's 3 months to get the business of the state done and to pass a budget. And so I want to come to, you know, some of the things that I think really you're already engaged in doing now and be very deliberate about seizing that opportunity. But there's no question, I mean, you know, I'm third generation union, and that essentially means almost nothing anymore, even in one of the few places in this country that had a general strike. But we've worked with organized labor in Washington State to do legislative advocacy and to talk about the connections between labor issues and housing and poverty issues. And I think there's you know, good work that's been done there and good work that can continue to be done. But I actually think that the key is, you know, this gentleman talking about his college-educated son working for $10 an hour. It's, you know, if only the middle class had been stagnant for 30 years. The middle class has been reduced painfully over the last 35 years, and that is continuing to happen. And I think that is also where there is opportunity. You know, if Tim or I goes to speak to a legislator or to give testimony at a city or county council budget hearing, they pretty much know what we're going to say before we open our mouths. Now, we still go and do it, and we like to make the most of it, and we're both, you know, interested in the presence of, you know, the known protest voice. But the fact is, it's a totally different story when people show up who say, you know, I am a teacher, I am a retired dentist, you know, I am a parent, I am a child care worker, I drive a truck, and I think that housing is one of the most important issues that you, elected officials, have a responsibility to deal with. That is the kind of voice that you all bring to this conversation, and that is actually something that has been missing. You know, I think that's where I see there being a really powerful opportunity to say, you know, the service piece, providing shelter on a week-by-week or month-by-month basis in the church basement, providing meals, getting kids involved, not participating in the dehumanization and distancing of people is all incredibly important, and it is important on a human scale. It cannot, it may not be divorced from the political advocacy. And that's the thing that I think is most exciting about, you know, your having invited us here to be part of your conversation about faith and family homelessness. Because it is a question of moral outrage, and it is a question of legislators from wealthy, single-family home neighborhoods in West Seattle and in Northeast Seattle and in Bothell, you know, hearing from their voting constituents. You must prioritize restoring the 15% cut to the TANF grant. Why do you expect me as a taxpayer to support a welfare benefit that is not enough to keep families in housing? $478 a month for a family of 3. That's what we give to the people who are struggling in Washington State, and we cap it at 60 months. That contributes to family homelessness. That is a public policy that our state legislators have the ability to correct. And if they hear it from you, that can move that public policy. So it is, you know, that incredible value of saying we care about this issue and we care about the families and the 17-year-old sons and their mothers, you know, who are absolutely trying to do the best they can for themselves. And there are thousands of families like that. And so we care about them as a whole as well. And I think that's really probably the most powerful thing that can come out of this faith and family homelessness effort is to mainstream the outrage. So that every single legislator in Olympia, you know, we gave these 2,736 buttons and letters and about 600 of these filled-in postcards to every single King County legislator on Monday, on Housing and Homelessness Advocacy Day. But they need to hear it again on Interfaith Advocacy Day. They need to hear it every single week of the legislative session so that it is not an option to say, well, you know what, we couldn't really fix it this year, come back next year.
Plus, I kind of like the mainstream the outrage. That's good.
I'm going to put that on our website.
Go right ahead.
So I'd like to try and ask a big picture advocacy question, because the long-term solution obviously is the social revolution. I don't think that's a socialist revolution. I think it's a social revolution about remembering what we're supposed to be as people and as a country. But that's a generational, that's a long-term solution that I hope that outrage continues to raise minimum wages, to change the ideas Doug has, to change so that you're not dehumanizing people. But in the meantime, I mean, you have this ongoing problem which happens as a result of lack of dollars. And if you can't change the wage system overnight so that everybody is making a living wage and can afford food and shelter, is there a dollar amount that we could put on this in a way that says to Olympia, or says to Congress, or whatever municipality, this is a dollar amount, or this is a dollar amount per person, or something that explains, number one, that it's a number that could be achieved. I mean, it's like the number of what does it take to feed everybody in the world? And you look at it, and it's what we spend in 4 hours on our defense budget. And you could literally provide enough food for everybody in the world. So that number to solve that problem.
You probably feed everyone in the world with what America spends on porn every year.
Yeah, right.
Is there a bigger advocacy question in terms of those dollars? You know, where it's not just, okay, let's try to get that subsidy from 478 to 600, but we need $100 million, or whatever that number is. And how do we, either from government resources, from private sources, what's that way in which we could take a look at the whole problem and say, you know, we wouldn't have this problem, let's attack it right now, we wouldn't have this problem 5 years from now if we made the following changes to our underlying system. I don't know where you go with that, but that's.
Dan also had his hand raised a few minutes ago, I didn't get a chance to answer that question. Did you guys want to respond to Joe's question?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have something that I'd like to respond, but it's two pieces. One is, this is a strategy issue. So when this community came together to create a 10-year plan to end homelessness, which was both a federal mandate and sort of rhetorical device, and an opportunity that we seized, there was debate about whether or not to put a price tag on it. And the price tag was going to be $1 billion. And there was a strategic decision made not to put that number out there because it would be too big, too scary. That was my decision.
And it's tiny. It's a tiny.
Well, it's tiny. So here's one of the things. There isn't one single answer. I agree with you. This is a long-term issue. But what I want to highlight is we didn't get here because of a lack of resources.
Right.
We really didn't get here because of a lack of resources. We got here because of specific, intentional and unintended consequences of public policy decisions. Among them, the decision at the federal level to drastically cut federal funding for housing subsidies. And at the same time, suppress wages, and there are many, many pieces, but it's not a lack of resources. And that's always crucial to keep in mind. We have a state housing trust fund in Washington State. It has created thousands, tens of thousands of units of affordable housing, and it is affordable across a range, but it is primarily affordable for people at 30% or below of whatever the area median income is. We're advocating for $175 million to go into the trust fund this year. At the federal level, we are advocating and have advocated with the Obama administration for the last 4 years for $1 billion to make a national housing trust fund. The legislation to create the fund has been signed into law, but it's an unfunded mandate. So, where is the $1 billion going to come from? I mean, that's not, a totally trivial question, but could we find $1 billion, and could that then create housing and good jobs to build that housing across the nation? Yes, it could. So there's one part of the answer.
How many millions of dollars is going into the sequester this year if it goes into?
Right.
Question. Tim, do you want to respond to any part of that before we move forward? I've handed out to you, I want to give a chance for us to take a look at some statistics that were the result of our most recent 20 people. Some of you guys have this information, but this is what we're looking at right now. From the one-night count, Allison's work with Sketch is central for this project. And maybe you guys be willing to, Allison, take a few minutes to talk about what is the one-night count? Was it something we have participated in the past? Maybe greater number to be part of it as well? Or how you guys would like to do it? It's up to you. What are your thoughts? First of all, if you could tell us what this information is, how we go about getting it, and some conclusions we draw from it.
Well, I'm going to be very brief because I feel like I was trying a lot. But I mean, I think really the conclusions don't need a great deal of elaboration. Real Change and Sharon Will this year did a very beautiful symbolic demonstration that the 2,736 people whom we counted have to literally resonate. They struck a gong in the public square one time for each of the people whom we counted. And I think that, we talked about this afterwards, the issue there is it can't just be happening in downtown Seattle that gong gets struck. Because, as you can see, we count people in Bellevue, in Kirkland, in Renton, in Auburn, in Federal Way, and we don't count everyone. But, this is a minimum number of people. And the power, I think, behind the one-night count comes from the incredible community outpouring that makes it possible for us to do it every year. 850 to 1,000 volunteers. We turn people away. So my apologies if you're one of those people, because we can't actually do a good job of respectfully and quietly counting with 15 people walking down an alley, so we keep our teams small. And But I think that the importance of it is that this is community powered. This is not done by local government, although we partner with local government. This is not done by a research company. This is community people assessing what's this reality, literally on the ground reality of homelessness and the unmet need in our communities. And what I can tell you is, because we, of course, add the numbers of people in shelter and the numbers of people in transitional housing, I can pretty much guarantee you that our total one-night count is going to break 9,000 this year. Because we added shelter, which is a really good thing, and our shelters are basically full every night. So with the increase in the unsheltered count, the increase in the available shelter, the fact that our shelters and transitional housing programs are full, we're looking at a single one-night count for King County of over 9,000 people. I'm sure of it, when we get the numbers.
And that doesn't count the youth and the people who are couch surfing.
It does include youth. It does not include people who are couch surfing, and that's for a very specific reason. There are some communities that attempt to capture people who are doubled up.
They didn't count Lincoln Park either.
Well, if you want to talk with me about where we do and don't count, I'm happy to talk about that afterwards, because we always add count areas every year. But the thing is that this can't just be a number. Each one of these people whom we counted is an actual individual person, and it includes youth, it includes kids, it includes veterans, it includes the underage boy who was on the bus, it includes the person who was sleeping on the bus, whom our count team saw be woken up and told to get off the bus by, law enforcement. But it doesn't include everybody. So all the more reason to say, this is truly unacceptable. I mean, that's just, that's the whole point about seeing
And I think
the salary increase on the front page next to the one-night count results.
And I think that really is a big part of, if not the biggest part of the value of the one-night count, is that it gets that 850 to 1,000 volunteers out in the street once a year that are doing the kind. And this number is obviously not the number of people who were actually out on the street that night. There were lots of people who were missed. They don't count all of the areas. The green belts are too dangerous to go in. Some of the green belts are too dangerous to go into. It's the methodology remains roughly the same year to year, so it's apples to apples, kind of. But everybody understands this is an undercount, but just getting people out there to see that for themselves is really valuable. I mean, it's shocking to me, and I've been doing this stuff for 25 years. Every time we do an overnight encampment, like a downtown park or something like that, I am freshly amazed at how much is going on out in the street at 3 and 4 in the morning. There are people walking around all over the town that don't have anywhere else to go. There's this sort of point right before 5 a.m. when you're like really sort of at your wettest and coldest and most miserable, and you're waiting for the sun to come up and for a coffee shop to open. And I remember waiting for McDonald's to open at 5 in the morning so I could get a cup of coffee and egg muffin or whatever. And I went in there, and there were like 20 other people in the McDonald's who were there at the crack of 5 who had exactly the same idea. And those weren't protest campers. Those were people who just had been out surviving on the street all night. And I'm sure that that's a story that gets reproduced at every McDonald's and coffee shop across America that opens up early. And people need to see that.
And I will say, not in defense of Howard Schultz personally, but in defense of the company that he runs, this is very sincere. Many Starbucks stores are extremely accommodating to people who have nowhere else to go up to and including letting folks use the restroom. And I
I've seen that
find
too.
that to be really profoundly valuable. I used to boycott Starbucks, but I don't anymore.
Well, I mean, the
because
people
they
who are working at Starbucks are like, you know, college graduates who are making $11 an hour. There's some sympathy there, I think.
Another good, important advocate or ally in this is the Seattle Public Libraries. And I know the Fourth and Marion Library right downtown, you can spend any time of day you walk in there, you'll find well over 15, 20 people sitting, reading. But of course, there's challenges around that. But it's one thing to look at. Andy, or I'm sorry, the person next to you there.
The question I would like to ask, we hear over and over that we know that the one-night count is an undercount. Do we have any real idea how low that count actually is?
You know what? It doesn't matter. So Tim is going to get a little schooling from me on this, but in fact, the way we do the one-night count is extremely deliberate and careful where we count. So where we count, we actually do a very thorough job, and that includes hospital emergency rooms, the organized tent cities, many green belts, public parks, publicly accessible places. It used to be that we were among the communities that gave sort of our best guesstimate to the federal government, because the one-night count is now required to apply for federal homeless housing dollars. And something like 8 years ago, the federal government said, well, no longer can you do any kind of estimating. You have to actually literally count people. And you
have to count them in the last week of January.
Yeah, right, last 10 days.
Miserable.
So actually, what I think that did is I think that it strengthened people's understanding that we're not making these numbers of people up. This is it, and we know it's a minimum. And I don't think that I think it's good when people say we know that there are other people out there, Lincoln Park or, you know, parts of North Bend or along the Green River that got flooded out, but we know there were people there. I think we shouldn't get too caught up in, is it 100 people more or 100 people less, or 200 people more or 200 people less? If we get to the point where we're counting 100 people a night outside, that will really be something. So I don't know if that is a satisfactory answer, but my response is, you know, and I spent 10 years as a researcher at the Public Health Department, I think our methodology is very sound, and I accept that it's an undercount, and I'm not troubled by that.
I'm not troubled by the fact that it's an undercount at all, and I understand perfectly exactly why the one-night count is done exactly the way it is. But you're sitting in a room full of people who are interested about the actual issue of homelessness.
Yeah.
And as a person who's very interested in that subject, I'd like an idea whether this undercount is, say, 90% of the homeless population, or is it really 10% of the homeless population? Is it maybe half of the homeless population? How large are the numbers we're really dealing with here? Because the majority of the homeless people that, how to put this, the majority of the homeless people that ordinary citizens run into and see, I suspect, are living in places where they are not seen.
I don't think that's actually true. Yeah, I think that's true for people who are doubled up. But, you know, I think that actually we've got, you know, the people who are doing the count in most communities are people who live and work with people who are homeless in those communities. And so they have a pretty good sense of where folks are.
It's folks, I know this is wonderful. We're at 1:25 right now, and we asked our guests to be here till 1:30. So before we go into another round of questions, I guess I'd like to give them a chance to give us, I know, Alison, you have a number of things right there. Would you like to talk about what you've got there? Perhaps you could hand out to us?
Well, I think
what are your thoughts?
I'll just have them available for people. I mean, we have action alerts. I'm sure you guys are you know, getting good information from various sources about the, you know, messages to deliver right now in Olympia. action words that you can sign up on. I have a few extra postcards if people want to fill them out, and then information about our Project Cool, which is about supporting students who are homeless. So I thought in particular for the family homelessness focus of your work, I think there's a, the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction just released their latest numbers of the children, 27,532, you're exactly right. 27,000.
In the state of Washington. 27,532 children that are reported homeless attending public schools in the state.
So there are two things to know about that number. One is that includes kids who are doubled up. And the other is that the largest proportion of children in families who are homeless are not yet school age. So they're not included in that number.
And it rose 46% from 2009 to 2011. 46% increase. And this just this last count, it rose 5%. So it's a 5% on top of a 46% increase in the last 4 years.
And you should know, though, that that is partly the result of increased emphasis telling the schools, you must fulfill your obligation to identify these children. You're not doing a good enough job. And once they're identified, they're eligible for additional support.
So I want to talk a little bit about the horse we've been riding for the last year or so, and that is really focusing on supporting folks who are in the tent cities and are car campers. I find it incomprehensible that when we have, on a night in January, counted nearly 3,000 folks on the street after the shelters are filled, that we are not, as a community and as public policy, embracing encampments that are self-organized by homeless folks to create community and safety and more dignified conditions for themselves. Between Tent City 3, Tent City 4, Nicholsville, and Unity Village, we're looking at 300 to 400 people a night that are able to camp in conditions where there's community that supports them, there's connections to the broader community, they're safe, their needs, at least in some way, are being met, and they're not as in danger or exposed as they would be if they were isolated and trying to survive on their own. And I think that the value of people coming together in community and what that does for their sense of self is something that in policy terms is often undervalued. And I believe that these need to be embraced as part of the solution and not seen as a problem to perhaps be tolerated, or we turn the other way, and that it's enough that we just don't send in the police to disband the encampment. That, to my mind, stops somewhat short of a progressive response to how we should be interacting with these encampments. And I think the same thing is true of car campers, that we should be embracing harm reduction solutions to folks whose needs are not being met by the system as it's set up in terms of service delivery. And we have this program that's starting in Ballard and has been going for a few years, where churches are stepping up to offer parking spaces for car campers, and there's some oversight that is provided along with that. But I mean, talk about a case study in glacial system change. I mean, this began with Mary Lou Dickerson getting $10,000 out of the state legislature for a pilot program in 2007, and it took basically 3 or 4 more years to get enough money added to that by the city to turn it into a pot of money big enough to do anything with. I think they got like another 10 or 15 out of the city to be able to hire a program coordinator, and this year that's been doubled. So now we're talking about, I don't know, $50,000 to fund this pilot program, and they've got, I think 8 parking spaces that they're doing. I mean, that's great. That's great that they're doing that. That's great that those churches have stepped up. But God, it is just so pathetically dinky compared to the need. And the idea to me of, you know, proactively supporting folks who are living in their cars and seeing if there's a way that we can outreach to them, get them some services, at least prevent their cars from being towed so that they don't wind up at DESC, that's kind of a no-brainer. And what links both of these together is I don't think that we can ever end homelessness without authentically involving the people who are homeless themselves. And that we need to take a look at the steps that people are taking, their own survival solutions that people are creating in the face of unmet need. Car camping is one survival solution that people are taking, and tent cities are another. And I think that there is an enormous amount of untapped energy there and relationships that can be created that can become very, very powerful in system change terms if we were to embrace these as legitimate solutions and take a harm reduction approach to supporting what they're doing.
Tim, how would you invite directly to real change, the kinds of things our congregation can do to be part of your organization's solution?
Well, I mean, there's something that's coming up very, very immediately. We've been doing this organizing called Advocacy that has been geared at moving the policymakers around homelessness towards embracing these sorts of survival solutions as having legitimacy. And we've been doing overnight encampments for the last year prior to the governing board meetings, which occur quarterly, and then showing up with a bunch of people to try to move them on this issue. And their next meeting is going to be on April 25th. And what we're focused on doing is not turning out ourselves to that meeting, but turning out the broader community to that meeting, turning out our allies to that meeting, so that folks like you
Shall we be there? Shall we be there?
We're
there.
and
We're there.
saying this is important.
Uh-huh.
And in the first 2 weeks of April, there's going to be 3 forums around the city. We haven't scheduled them yet, we're close, but we'll keep you posted. There's going to be 3 forums in the first couple of weeks of April where we'll have folks from the tent cities and the car camping talking about their lives and how folks can get involved.
Alison, likewise, a question for you. What are some ways that our congregation could assist you and your organization's solutions?
Well, I mean, I think, being vocal, not just in the city of Seattle, although that is important too. We have a mayoral race coming up this fall, and, that is always a great opportunity to raise these issues to the candidates. But I think it's really important not to have such a narrow perspective that we just think in terms of Seattle. I think one of the things that the organized tent cities have done for 12 years is...
City 3 has been operating 12 years continuously.
Yeah.
Do you include Nicholsville when you speak of tent cities, or is that kind of...
Yeah, there are 4 tent cities currently organized, and there's some formality to them. So tent city 3, tent city 4, Nicholsville, and Camp Unity.
I get confused.
I know. But by engaging, at person to person with different congregations as they move around, they have really kept this issue in the forefront in an incredibly powerful way. You know, part of why we collectively have the political interest that we do is because every 3 months, 50 to 100 people switch neighborhoods. and then, hundreds of people in those congregations get involved and they meet real people. And, so that is important. But I think that it's really, we have Project Cool for Back to School is known as a backpack and school supply project for 1,200 to 2,000 children who are homeless around King County. And what we do with that, though, is we link it to the rights that kids have under federal law to good education. And we try to work with the schools and with the service providers and with parents and kids to say, this is an opportunity to support kids to succeed, even as they are experiencing the displacement and trauma of homelessness. Because even if you're in a transitional housing program for 24 months, which is really good, it's still not your own place. So, so there are opportunities to get involved with that. I actually think that kids make fabulous advocates. They have a very profound sense of justice and what's fair and what's not fair. And so I would love it if there are kids who are interested in getting involved in Project Cool and doing some service and advocacy. I mean, I think that's also important as we engage young people in being stakeholders in the democratic process. So I think that's one opportunity, and I think the other thing is to just, what you're already doing, to keep asking questions, to keep saying this is really, we want affordable housing in our community. We want that affordable housing to be affordable to people who are on Social Security and to be affordable to people who are working, minimum wage jobs, even though that's not enough. And that really does, I think, generate a very different necessary response from people who are seeking our votes. So, you can sign up on our alert list, and I think really the other thing is to hear what resonates with people from this congregation and other congregations that are involved, because that's what's creative about this, is, what really makes sense on a common sense level to regular people is that we house people.
Thank you. It is 1:35 right now. I think we've gone past our time, but I'd like to say thank you all for coming. It's been a wonderful, invigorating, thought-provoking afternoon, and we're so blessed to have you with us today in our church. And with that said, this is a church. We're a worship community. And I'd like to ask if Diane can lead us into a send-off prayer or a blessing for our time going out into the world with this advocacy power. Sure. And you're welcome to be part of it. You can step outside.
But let's stand up.
Aren't we in your way?
Now get in.
Get in here. Me looking at you like, what are you doing? Holy One, it's so easy to feel overwhelmed by numbers and scope. And then you just come and be among us, and people like Tim and Alison and so many who are working to be part of the solution of this. So thank you for all the gadflies and prophets in Seattle, all those who walk around with some holy rage and are working to stir it up in us. Thank you for someone like Sindhu who just looks at us and said, we're going to be there, right? Thank you, thank you. May we be more fully tonight the people of justice you want than we were when we walked in here this morning. continue to bless Tim and Alison and their work, and all of us in this project until that time when everyone has a place, a safe place to lay their head. In Christ's name.
Amen.